How's it going, everybody? Paul Brecht of Hawaii Sports Radio Network here, joined by a special guest, the national recruiting editor for 247 Sports, Brandon Huffman. Brandon, first things first, thank you so much for joining me today. I know you're an incredibly busy guy. In fact, I think I caught you right before a flight as well. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
So, Brandon has been in Hawaii multiple times, has been in the college recruiting scene, football recruiting scene specifically, for almost 25 years, just a hair under, but worked in college sports and worked with covering college sports for over a quarter century now, and is one of the best in the business. Was just recently over on Maui for the Under Armour Next camp over at King Kekalike High School, and actually just put out an article 247 Sports did about a lot of the top performers from the camp, which featured a lot of the top prospects from the classes of 2025, 26, 27, and 2028. So I think that's where I want to kick things off here and ask you, how was the camp? How was it being back out here in Hawaii and just seeing the next wave of talent that are here in the islands?
Yeah. I mean, it was a great camp. This is the third year they've done the Under Armour Next camp on Maui. JoJo Dixon of Dixon Performance kind of spearheaded the efforts to get this out here in year one in 2022. And it's only grown since then. You know, it went from being mostly kids from Hawaii to now even kids from the mainland. They want to make a weekend of it, come to the camp, and it raises the talent level. But this camp was dominated by the kids from Hawaii, the overall MVPs, the two Under Armour game All-American selections that were handed out yesterday or on Saturday. And then there was another player who was invited a year ago to play in the 2025 game. And, I've been to, this was the fifth Under Armour camp I've been to in the country this year, if you count the Future 50 event in Florida. And more game invites went out at this camp than at any of the other camps. That includes the one in Salt Lake City, the one in Los Angeles, the one in Seattle. So it tells you the caliber of athlete that was at this event. We had the top three players in the 247 Sports composite were all there: Jaren Kiave Songa-Poloteli, Tristan Kini McMillan, and then Houston Kahanaya Torres. All three of those guys were there. Abel Ho'opi'i, who will be announcing his decision on Monday, earned an invitation to the Under Armour All-American game. Houston was invited a year ago. And then Isaiah Iosefa, who's committed to Arizona State, he also was invited. So that just gives you a little bit of an insight into the caliber of talent that was there on Maui. And while there were players that came from other states, this was Hawaii treated this as its own, and those players came and dominated.
That's what it seemed like for anyone who saw the social coverage throughout the day. And it's cool to see, especially, and I'm sure the camp over the 3 years has kind of evolved to be even better and better to the point where those invitations go out. I do want to ask you a little bit about a couple of those players that you mentioned, because you are in the predictions business and you are in the recruiting industry and whatnot. Talk about Jaren Keave Songa-Poloteli. He's also set to announce his decision on Monday, right around noon at Campbell High School. Abel Ho'opi'i, he also planning on announcing his commitment as well. So big day for the top 10 in the class of 2025 in Hawaii. Between the two of them, getting to know the two of them, what is a college program getting in these young men who have been, really produced out of the fires of Hawaii?
It's funny because you and I talked before offline about how this state is not just about linemen. I mean, when you think historically of the state of Hawaii, and we can touch on this later, but you think linemen. And so you have Abel, who was, more than adequate as a player at Kahuku. Now he's at Farrington. But the jump that he's made from January, when I saw him in January at two events, I was out here for the Polynesian Bowl. I saw him at the Warriors for Youth event on a Wednesday night. And then a few days later, I saw him at the Destroying Lineman event down in Honolulu. And Greg Biggins, who's my colleague at 247 Sports, who actually wrote the top performers piece, saw Abel at a couple of camps on the mainland. And we had just seen him get bigger, stronger, and nastier at every event. And that's, kind of what you expect from a player from from Hawaii, the kind of guys that UH has kind of prided themselves on. The problem is as the profile of the island has grown and the players have grown, a kid like that might have been a player that was going to UH. Well, now they've got a battle with SMU and University of Texas San Antonio with San Jose State. And you could see why SMU, who is going to the ACC this year, is making a concerted effort to get Abel. They brought him in for a visit. They're making a big push. They've offered a couple of his teammates. So with him, you're getting a guy who I think is probably going to end up being an interior lineman. I think he's going to play a guard spot in college, but playing right tackle, you can play left tackle. You see the athleticism, you see the footwork that he's got, but he's just this nasty, nasty player. He had one rep yesterday where the linemen were doing their one-on-ones behind the end zone, and it was like a scene out of The Blind Side. He drove his defender basically onto the track. By the time the defender got up, his arm was on the track. And, that's the kind of nasty that he plays with. And then you look at a guy like Jaron, everybody thinks that this is a quarterback free state. If you go back to, just Marcus Mariota or Tua, well, St. Louis has had a tremendous history of quarterbacks going back to Jason Gesser and Timmy Chang, who obviously now is the head coach at UH, but that guy was kind of the first real big name quarterback to come from here. And what we've seen is now it's just not all at St. Louis. You got Jaron, who's the number one player in the state, at Campbell. He could have gone to Punahou and waited his turn behind his brother, but he wanted to, kind of set on his own path, much like Talia Tagovailoa did when Tua was at St. Louis. Talia went to another school, but Jaron's a better prospect than John. And I say that as a firstborn, as the oldest, it hurts my heart at times to have to concede to the younger brother, but Jaron is a dog. I mean, I've seen him at a number of camps this offseason as well, at 7-on-7 tournaments. Got to see him at the Elite 11 Regional in Las Vegas, where he earned his invitation to the Elite 11 Finals. And then it's one thing to get to the Elite 11 Finals. You got 20 of the best quarterbacks, but you still have to make the actual Elite 11. And he did. And his rise has been pretty impressive. We've had him as the number one player in the state since January, since we were out here for that same Warriors for Youth event. But whoever gets him, and right now it's between Cal, Boise State, Utah State, and Oregon State, they're going to get a hell of a quarterback, this lefty, but with his stuff, there's a phrase, your best ability is availability. Right now, he's the highest rated uncommitted quarterback in the country. Wherever he commits on Monday, they're going to have to hold on to him over the course of the next 5-6 months, because there's going to be other schools. And I already know that there's a couple of schools that already have a quarterback, but there might be some reclassification going on, some other things that are keeping him warm too, just trying to say, hey, if something changes, something happens. That's the kind of offseason he had where he's put himself in that conversation.
He really has had an awesome offseason, it seemed like, which just builds on top of what has been an incredible career over at Campbell High School. I'm glad that he's been able to get a little bit of national notoriety as well. I know we've kind of moved forward first. I do want to bring it back because you are one of the veterans in this college recruiting game, in this college football recruiting game. And I'm curious just what got you into it in the first place, and what really inspired you to want to pursue this to the level in which you have, and which now you are a national recruiting editor. And that's a lot of people. What got you into recruiting in the first place?
It's funny. It's kind of that classic story of getting lucky with the timing of my age, but also B, somebody in my life when I was younger who kind of burned the passion inside of me. And so why I became in love with recruiting is I've always been a college football fan. I grew up, born and raised Southern California, going to games at the Rose Bowl with my grandpa, go watch UCLA play at the Rose Bowl. I would go to games at the Coliseum, but I would always go to the Rose Bowl game every New Year's Day. And I mean, to this day, I'm still that guy. I'm one of those old heads that the new college football fan hates, because I'm like, hey, tradition, that game needs to be played at 2:30 kickoff Pacific time on New Year's Day. When that sun sets between the third and fourth quarter, there's no more beautiful place in college football than in Pasadena. And I became a fan of college football at a young age. And at 6, went to my first Rose Bowl in 1983 on New Year's Day. Well, then I got to middle school, and my English teacher was a Notre Dame grad. And at that point, Notre Dame was the number one team in the country, ended up winning the national championship. That's how long ago that was, in 1988. And he used to get a magazine, Blue Gold Illustrated, and there was recruiting coverage. And I was always fascinated by, well, who are these guys in high school? I grew up the son of a high school baseball coach, so I always liked high school sports. But in middle school, I wanted to know where these guys were going to go play in college. And I'm a part of an era where you didn't find out where a player went to college until the day after signing day in February. You'd go get a USA Today, kids. The USA Today is a newspaper that was really popular for many years. But that was where you'd find out who was going where for college. And I graduated college about 10 years later in 1998. And at that point, the internet recruiting and football industry was just kind of getting its start. And so I got hired to be the Pac-10 digest, rest in peace Pac-10, rest in peace Pac-12, but to be covering college football for the Pac-10 in 1998. And I remember turning down a newspaper job and having a conversation with my dad. And my dad had been the guy who subscribed to 3 newspapers. And I remember him telling me, Brandon, nobody's ever going to get their news off the internet. Why would you ever turn down a newspaper job? I'm like, I don't know, Dad. I kind of feel like this is going to be worthwhile. 26 years later, my dad's vice president at a very prominent private school in Southern California, which has had a number of Division I college football players, first-round draft picks. And every once in a while, I say, hey, you're going to come by the school and do some interviews? I don't know, Dad. You're going to read about it in the newspaper? And, I feel like Michael Jordan in his Hall of Fame speech, my dad's like, you're never going to get over that. And I'm like, absolutely not. But I got lucky. Those first 4 or 5 years, I was just covering college football. I survived the very first .com bubble burst in 2001. And then at that point, went to another website. I was at the old version of Rivals, not the new Rivals that you know of, but the old version of Rivals, which is Scout, which is I was part of. And I was at a press conference and UCLA was introducing Ben Howland as their basketball coach. And the guy who covered UCLA football for Scout said, hey, you know what? I know you're a big recruiting guy. I know you're a big football guy. Why don't you come cover UCLA and USC recruiting for us? That was 2003, and I haven't looked back since. I moved from just covering UCLA and USC recruiting. USC had a third-year head coach there named Pete Carroll, and a few months later, they won their first national championship under Pete. I moved from that to California and Nevada to eventually becoming the West Coast manager of Scout, and then I became the first national recruiting analyst at Scout. Was there till 2017, in which Scout and 247Sports merged and became the national recruiting editor in 2017 at 247, where I've been now for 7 years. But my passion for recruiting was before I even got into this job. And you kind of have to be a nerd when it comes to following recruiting to be able to cover recruiting. And I've covered about 9 different variations and versions of recruiting to where we are at now in 2024.
And we're chatting with 247 Sports national recruiting editor, Brandon Huffman. You're talking about how the recruiting scene has changed. I mean, what feels like a trillion times at this point, especially over the past few years. I am curious about how you have seen the recruiting shift, but I am going to kind of slice it on down to our bubble of here in Hawaii. Mm-hmm. You mentioned joining or becoming in your current role back in 2017, I believe, right around that same time, the start of the Polynesian Bowl as well. You're on the selection committee for the Polynesian Bowl, have, I would assume, been to every game at this point. How have you seen recruiting specifically to Hawaii change over the past, however long you've been in the industry, but specifically as well over the past half decade or so?
Yeah, I would say kind of the turning point for the state of Hawaii in terms of the recruits, you might even go back to the 2007 Hawaii season and, the Colt Brennan year. Obviously, he was a Southern California guy, but, the team that Hawaii had when June Jones took him to the Sugar Bowl, and obviously he ultimately left for SMU, but that kind of got people understanding that, there wasn't just football played at UH. There was plenty of football played on the island. And that was the fall of 2007. Well, at that same time, there was a junior in high school recruit named Manti Te'o at Punahou High School. And early in the spring of 2008, when we were at Scout, we did our first ranking of the 2009 class. And Manti was the number 1 linebacker in the country by scout.com. He was a 5-star. And it was funny because that year we had 2 linebackers. We had an inside linebacker, we had an outside linebacker, and our number 1 inside linebacker was Vontez Burfict, who went on to have a great career at Arizona State. Very controversial career because, Vontez liked to make tackles after the whistle, and he liked to do other things after the whistle. And Manti was in that same class. And Manti was really the guy who I feel, and at that point I'd been covering the whole West region for about 2-3 years at that point. So I already had Hawaii's region, but Manti was the guy that really, in my opinion, opened the door for state of Hawaii kids to be recruited nationally. Now, obviously, there were plenty of guys before him that went and played at a high level, but that was Notre Dame. I mean, he was going to Notre Dame. You had Charlie Weiss, who was fresh off of, Tom Brady Super Bowls as his offensive coordinator. And when he landed Manti, it was almost like, and I know Brian Polian was the special teams coordinator at Notre Dame, but he was the one who recruited the state of Hawaii at the time. And he was kind of the guy that really, even more so than Charlie Weiss, really kind of blew open the way this state was recruited. And he goes to Texas A&M a couple of years later. They get Jeremy Tabuyo out of St. Louis as well, who went to Texas A&M. With a teammate of Marcus Mariota, but Manti was really the guy that made this a place where, oh wow, there's more than just offensive lineman and defensive lineman. Well, a couple of years later, and I still have the email. I get an email from this kid at St. Louis High School who's like, "Hey, Mr. Huffman, I really want to get evaluated and rated. Only problem is I haven't started for my high school team yet. I'm a junior, going to be a senior, but hopefully they'll take a look at me." And I remember going to see this kid play in Las Vegas at a 7-on-7 tournament. I'm sure everybody knows who I'm talking about at this point. And it was Marcus Mariota. And one of my close friends, a guy named Tavita Ofahengwe, who played at Kahuku High School, was Mr. Irrelevant in the 2001 draft, went from Kahuku to BYU. He coached the 7-on-7 team with Marcus. And I always say, dude, there was no better defensive coordinator in college football than your play calling. And you went 0-3 with the future Heisman Trophy winners at Huff. A quarterback can't run in 7-on-7. Just you watch. Well, obviously the rest was history. And so what Manti he walked, and then Marcus, I can't even say he ran because his recruitment was so unremarkable. He had an offer from Memphis. His coach at St. Louis had a brother on staff at Memphis. And ultimately, Mark Helfrich at the time as the OC comes to Oregon, sees him. But then after that, it was like, okay, we've got dudes. And if you go in between the Manti to Marcus era, there were still some guys getting recruited. But then after Marcus, the class right after him, you had DeForest Buckner and Luke Kamatule. Those guys then started to say, okay, we're going to Hawaii. We're going to find those dudes. And then every year since, then you had the class with Tua in it. You've had subsequent classes. And now it's like coaches want to have a Polynesian on staff because they're usually related or connected to everybody there, to now where those coaches are coming over to the state in December. They're coming in January and February when they're allowed to be on the road. They're coming in April and May. And they're plucking offensive linemen, defensive linemen, tight ends, quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, linebackers, defensive backs. And it is now a state where I've said, for years, it'll never be California because it just doesn't have the depth. It may not even be Arizona because it doesn't have the population. But Hawaii is pushing Arizona and Utah for the number 2 state out west in terms of the top end talent. It just doesn't have the depth quite that Utah did. And it was hurt, obviously, by that 2020 season not having a season. There were a number of players that ended up at Bishop Gorman or ended up in Utah where there was football being played when there was uncertainty if the 2021 season was going to happen. But now you're seeing those kids stay in Hawaii, and that's how you have Elite 11 finalists. That's how you have 3 guys get invited to the Under Armour game. So you've seen the state go from kind of just this thought it's only linemen to, if I want to find a dude, no matter what the position is, I'm going to the state of Hawaii to find one.
It really has seemed that way. It's cool to hear you say it as well, because like I mentioned before, you've been able to live through different life cycles of college recruiting and how it's been. And it is interesting to think how certain players could even open the door for future generations. Because even looking as far as the 2025 class, the top recruits, like you mentioned, the top of the top talent in Hawaii goes up for, with anybody. You have a linebacker going to Notre Dame again, and this upcoming class. You have another Nebraska offensive lineman, back-to-back years, the top lineman in the state goes to Nebraska. It's very cool to see. I'm curious also what you've thought of Hawaii's recruiting in this time ever since Timmy Chang has taken over, because he specifically has and his staff has specifically taken the reins and wanted to recruit locally and keep a lot of that top talent that you're talking about here in Hawaii home in Hawaii. How have you enjoyed or how have you liked what they have done in the recruiting cycles in their first 3 years here?
I love it. And here's why. You have to understand Hawaii to recruit to Hawaii, to coach at Hawaii. And I covered Timmy Chang's predecessor at his previous stop, where he had numerous previous stops, but when he was at Arizona State, and he ignored the state of Arizona to go recruit the state of Texas because that's where he was from. And I've known Nick Rolovich a long time. I know that, Rolo, while being a Bay Area native, he's a UH alum. He got it. But then you have Timmy, who you cannot get any more into the fabric of Honolulu, of the island, of UH football than Timmy Chang. And it was a tremendous hire. I know that there were people that kind of scoffed at it. He'd never been a coordinator at a Power 5 school or an FBS school. Are we only hiring him because he's an alum? There's some schools where you have to hire an alum who understands and has a passion and has a love for that school. And, Timmy came in, he took his lumps early on, but there was never a backing down from him. He wanted to go toe to toe with the big boys. And, UH is in that weird predicament where they want to recruit the local kids, but they also understand that with the local kids that are higher profile, they may leave and go to the mainland to go to school. But they never burn those bridges because, well, some coaches burn those bridges and they're no longer coaching at UH. But the other ones were smart enough to know, like, hey, if he doesn't like it, if it doesn't work out, you can come back here and you can thrive. And, Timmy gets that. He understands, hey, I'm sure if he would have had more offers and opportunities coming out of high school, maybe he doesn't go to UH. But he understands that this is good for the island when those kids are getting recruited. But what's more remarkable is the first weekend in June, the first weekend of official visits, UH had a number of local kids that came on official visits. And I was texting with Silas Clapham, who's one of the directors of recruiting at Hawaii. I'm like, I get these photos from every kid's official visit for the articles, their photo shoots. And UH has, besides having the most beautiful backdrop, they had this thing. And I was like trying to figure out, like, what exactly is the prop that you guys are using? And, Silas and Tina are both like, it's something that was made specifically for our guys. And it's special. And you're only going to get it at UH. And it just looks so cool. And so, Zaid Marataragi, who's a commit to University of Hawaii, some of the other players that are committed there, Titus Lakaiden from St. Louis, who's also committed there. They had it in their prop, and you just see a huge emphasis on hometown hero. You see a huge embracing of the Hawaiian culture and the Polynesian culture and being local. You see them using social media better than a lot of Power 5 schools that have a full staff of social media interns and full-time social media guys. And Hawaii, the University of Hawaii has made it a point to be like, listen, we might be isolated out here in the Pacific Ocean, but we got to go toe to toe with those 11 other Mountain West schools. And now you throw in Washington State and Oregon State. We got to go to toe to toe with all these Power 5 schools. What are we going to do to separate ourselves? And they've done a tremendous job of that in just marketing, going after top players. UH is not going to be like, there's a lot of schools that'll do this, I see it in the state of Nevada, UNLV for years. We're not going to try to get a Bishop Gorman kid because he's not going to go here. UH says, hey, you know what? We may have to go against Alabama for a kid. We may have to go against Ohio State for a kid, but that kid's going to know he's got a home and a spot at University of Hawaii. We're going to invite him to games in the fall. We want him to come to a junior day. We want him to come on an official visit, even if we're not going to get him, because we want him to know this is an option. And you will win more of those battles than you think if you put the effort and make those kids feel like, God, you know what? These guys are recruiting me as hard as Bama, as hard as Georgia, as hard as Ohio State, as hard as USC, as hard as Oregon. And that's what you have to do to separate yourself when you're not a G5 or a G4 school. And that's where I think Timmy has kind of looked at this. This is a challenge, and I'm accepting it, and I'm taking this challenge on.
It's music to our ears here in Hawaii. It's lovely to hear, and it makes a lot of sense as well, right? You can't get any of the top talented players unless you put your name in the ring to get these top talented players. Part of it is about being seen, and that is something that I do want to get into with you as well, because that's a big reason I have you on today. You're holding, and it's in conjunction with, you're holding a entire recruiting seminar at Mauna Loa High School here on Oahu on Wednesday. July 10th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. It's open to all. There's no fee. There's a request to bring a small donation of school supplies for those in need. So I guess that's your entry ticket if you want. But it seems to be what is going to be an incredibly valuable resource for young athletes, whether it be someone just entering high school or someone going into their senior season. It seems like it's going to be useful talking about getting yourself recruited, varsity film in the fall, 7-on-7s, camps in the spring and winter, what offers and visits truly mean, and a ton of other things. I'm curious just a little bit about this event, this seminar, how much you're looking forward to it, and some information for people who may want to attend.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where, like, by being in the recruiting space for 22 years and seeing the variations of where it was in 2003 when I first started exclusively covering recruiting to 2024, where social media has become such a huge part of it, where NIL is a part of it, where there's camps and events and 7-on-7 tournaments and everything going on. I've got a lot of bandwidth that I've gotten over the years in terms of, just information that I've been able to glean and knowing a lot of this is an educated guess. It's a lot of years of kind of fact gathering. Well, this is how you tackle your recruitment. This is how you get yourself exposure. This is how you get yourself noticed by college coaches. What do you have to do? Because at the end of the day, and I say this as a dad who, my oldest daughter, all my kids played sports, but they were never elite athletes. So there was never going to be a opportunity to play college sports. My son played football and baseball. He was a small college baseball recruit and then decided he wanted to go to a big university. He's going to go work in recruiting and personnel because he loves being around that. But you have to do the research and the homework yourself. It's not just going to magically show up unless you are a genetic freak of nature where you hit the genetic lottery. 99.9% of high school football players did not hit that genetic lottery. That's why you see such a small percentage of players go on from high school to college. Well, that doesn't mean your dreams are going to end when you graduate high school. No, it just means that your dreams may be recalibrated. And so I like to do these seminars to kind of give parents the hope that, yeah, your son may play college football. It just might not be in front of 110,000 at Kyle Field in Texas A&M. It might be in front of 100 people at Cal Lutheran in Southern California. But if the dream is to play college football, you don't care if it's big or small. You want to play those games those extra 4 years. And that's why I like to do these seminars and go to places where, hey, it's hard to get exposure. I've done them in Idaho. I've done them in Montana. I've gone to 2 camps or 3 camps in the state of Alaska, done recruiting seminars. How do I get recruited? No coaches want to come up here. Yeah, they don't, but that doesn't mean you can't play. This is what you got to do. And so it's a how-to. It's free. I get no greater joy than when I find a kid who nobody knew about, gets recruited, and boom, now he's playing college football. And it's like, hey, man, I went to a camp that you were at and you wrote about me, and all of a sudden coaches started following me. And I'm like, well, all I did was wrote the article. You were still the one that got into the weight room every morning. You're still the one that ate nutrition, had the nutrition to your value. You did all those things. All I did was simply write an article and had some connections to coaches that they read it. You do the work, and that's what I'm trying to do, is give you the how-to guide to get yourself recruited, to get that exposure. And I love being able to do that. And, I've never made a cent off of doing that, and I don't intend to, because part of why I love this job is I get to, cover these high school football players before they become stars. And then I get these random emails from a dad saying, the day his son's invited to the Pro Bowl, Brandon, if it weren't for the article you wrote about my son in 2006, that school would have never recruited him, and he might have gone here, and now he's going to his 3rd Pro Bowl. Those emails are why I keep doing the job that I do. And did I ever get to go to the Pro Bowl with him? No, it would have been nice. I already come to Hawaii enough. Did I ever get tickets to his games? Absolutely not. But I get a good feeling knowing that, like, hey, your son was going to get recruited no matter what. He's elite. There's a reason he's going to Pro Bowls. It had nothing to do with anything I did. But even if I play a small part of that journey, that's what I love to do, because it's such a fun part of this job to see kids realize their dreams. And that's, I've always enjoyed about this job, is that I'm just a little speck in the wheel of a kid's journey. I might be one spoke out of 20 spokes, but you still kind of need that spoke, all those spokes, to keep that wheel turning. But if I can help a kid realize his dream by just giving them some information, just giving them some encouragement, some guidance, all the better. Because I've been spoiled, and I always say this: the reason I work so hard at my job is I'm afraid I'm going to get replaced at some point by somebody younger, cheaper, less experienced, and more energetic. No, I keep doing this, and one of the things that keeps me going is every year there's a new class of kids. Every year there's a new set of kids that are trying to realize their dreams. And it motivates me every morning to keep that fire burning for myself to help those kids find a job, because I've always been scared to death. What am I going to do if I ever lose this job? Because I'm not good enough to do anything else. There might be people think I'm not good enough to do the job I'm doing right now. I think 22 years might counter that, but I don't want to have to go get a real job. I want to keep covering college football and keep covering recruiting, and I enjoy doing it. And that's why I like doing the seminars and talking to these kids about pursue your dreams. Be realistic, but pursue those dreams.
It seems like the personification of if you work hard and you are talented enough, no matter what, somebody will find you and give you that opportunity. And it is really cool and really rewarding. I said before, this is in conjunction with the National Football Foundation, the Hawaii chapter, as well, at Moanalua High School on Wednesday, July 10th at 1 p.m. Hawaii time. It's free of charge. Please do bring small donation of school supplies to provide as a donation, as well as your entry ticket, and come in and learn all about the handbook, essentially, of how to be recruited to the next level from somebody, like I've said before, the national recruiting editor for 247 Sports, Brandon Huffman. Thank you so much for your time today. Before I let you go, I want to give an opportunity to plug, pitch, or promote anything that you might have coming down the line, or that you do have just for the beautiful people.
Yeah, and whenever anybody offers me the opportunity, I'm not going to go pitch all my work. I'm not going to go pitch my recruiting website that I write for. My wife and I run a nonprofit foundation, the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation, that was founded in 2016 after our daughter Avery passed away at the age of 7 from a brain tumor that she was diagnosed with when she was 6, and it was a cancerous brain tumor. She fought for 7.5 months, and we have raised over $1 million for research for doctors and professors and leading researchers around the world trying to find a cure for this disease. And while I've said that, I'm not good in anything else, I know hopefully one day somebody just says, hey, we're going to donate millions of dollars to your foundation, and you're just going to go raise money for support. That's what I hope to do. But it's my passion. That's my passion project. I love my job. I love being able to cover college football. And I love covering college football recruiting. But there's nothing I'm more passionate about than sharing my daughter's story, but more importantly, to help families fight back. And so what keeps me motivated, what keeps me going every day, aside from the job, is just knowing my little girl. And it's why I'm so passionate about doing the seminars and allowing kids to pursue their dreams and help them pursue their dreams, because my daughter dreamed of being a baker one day. And within a week of her diagnosis, she was paralyzed in a wheelchair and ultimately succumbed and never got to realize her dreams. And so that has motivated me even more to be like, if a kid has a dream, I want them to pursue it. We do camps, 7-on-7 tournaments around the country that are called Avery Strong Showcases, Avery Strong 7-on-7 tournaments. And the only thing that I say is, hey, if you're going to go out there and play a sport, you better put all your energy into it, because there's kids that would have given anything to get out of a wheelchair and to run around again. So don't squander your opportunity. Don't squander your talent. And that's my pitch. That's the one thing that I say, hey, if you just want to read up on this incredible little girl who's my hero, go take 5 minutes, go read about it. And I guarantee you there's no way that it won't tug at your heartstrings and be like, gosh, I got to get out of my whatever fake injury I'm dealing with and get out there and tough it out, because there were kids out there much, much tougher than me.
Yeah. An incredible foundation. I did read up on it a little bit last night, the Avery Huffman DIPG Foundation. You are the executive director and, the co-founder and all that stuff. I will read this. Established in 2016 to honor the courage, fight, and legacy of our hero and inspiration, daughter Avery Hayden Huffman, who passed in February 2016 after bravely battling the deadliest form of brain cancer. Foundation honors her by raising funds that 100% support medical research for diffuse intrinsic pontine glioma. I will say this. We'll have a link alongside this as well, in case you would like to go check out that foundation. Brandon, I want to say thank you so much for your time today, man. You've shared a lot of really, really good stuff for our friends here in Hawaii, and you're getting ready to share even more later this week, one more time on Wednesday, July 10th at Moanalua High School, putting on a recruiting seminar for all ages that is free of charge. Just please bring a small donation of school supplies to get in. Brandon, one last time, thank you so much for your time today.
Appreciate you having me on, and thanks for letting me share.